Cells are the building blocks of living things. Meaning that all living things are made up of cells, right? When we say building blocks, right, that's a way to put it, huh? Building blocks. That means that if we look at a house, for example, if we want to make a house, you will probably need some bricks, right? And you need to put them like this together. Am I correct? And then we are going to put another row here, right? And another one here, like that. And then eventually you will have a wall, right? Yes. So let's say these are bricks, and this is a wall. Now living things are kind of made up of, you see, walls and bricks, but we don't call them walls and bricks. We call the bricks are the cells. Like for example, in our skin, cells are grouped similar to that. You see, like that. This spot that I'm going to draw in somewhere there, that is the nucleus, right? Nucleus. So there is a group of cells making a wall, which we don't call a wall, by the way. What we call it? What do we call cells of the same type grouping together like that? We call that a tissue, right? So tissues are formed by cells of the same type. If it is the skin, we call it epithelial, right? Epithelial tissue, right? That is for the skin, for example, right? For the lining of organs, for the coating of organs, right? Say if you have, for example, the esophagus, the outer layer is made up of epithelial tissue, and the inner layer is also epithelial tissue. So it's not only the skin, but also the lining of organs, right? However, if these cells were bone cells, then we call that bone tissue, right? So we have epithelial tissue, we have bone tissue, guys. We have nerve tissue, like in the brain, and the cells are neurons, for example, that group together. We also have fatty tissue, which is made up of fat cells. See what I mean? So let's say these ones are like this, kind of round, full of fat. Some of them don't even have a nucleus. Nerve tissue is made up of neurons, which look like this. See, some of them have kind of a tail. Bone tissue are kind of long cells like this. They just pile up together to make your muscles. I got confused with muscle tissue. So bone tissue is kind of round cells like that also. But we have muscle tissue. How could I have forgotten this one? Muscle tissue. I was saying these are kind of long cells. Like that. guys. So look at what we have here. We have epithelial tissue made up of epithelial cells. We have bone tissue made up of bone cells grouping together. We have nerve tissue made up of neurons grouping together. Like these two, for example. Fatty tissue, a lot of cells full of fat grouping together, let's say around your belly. Right? There you have fatty tissue. Or on the thighs or buttocks. Right? And these are muscle tissues like in your biceps or triceps, made up of muscle cells. See what I mean? So these are tissues which are made up of cells. Okay, guys? So that is actually how we are organized in the body, right? Like a house, the simplest component in a house is the bricks. The bricks come together to make a wall, and then walls join together to make a what? If you have 4 walls like this one, what will you have? Let's say this is the dining room or the kitchen. What is that? That is a room. Am I correct? So look at the structures.
Yeah.
Huh? A room is made up of walls. Each wall is made up of bricks. If we make a comparison to that in the human body, well, the bricks are the cells and the walls are the tissues. And tissues that group together make a what? Make an organ. An organ. Like for example, look at your let me say your hand, right? Your hand, right? That's an organ, ain't it? That's an organ in your body. Do we have skin on our hands? Well, yes, we have epithelial tissue. Do we have bones? Yes. Do we have nerves in the hands? Yes. Do we have fat? Yes, we have some fat under the skin. Do we have muscles? Well, yes. And then all these tissues group together to form an organ. See what I mean, guys? Which in this case is a room in your house, right?
Okay.
And then if we put organs together, right? If we put organs together, like for example, let's say you have your mouth, right? And then you have the esophagus, and then you have the stomach, and then the small intestines, and then the large intestine, right? And then the rectum and the anus. Well, that, just look at how many organs, right? You have the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus. Huh? Some organs, a group of organs working together to help you break down food and put nutrients in your body. What we call that? All this group of organs is what part of your body? Well, that will be the digestive system, isn't it? So organs which are made up of tissues, right? Organs grouped together play a role in your body. Like the role of all these organs working together is to help you get nutrients out of whatever you eat and put them in your blood. Right, guys? So this is how we are organized, guys. This is what we call levels of organization. Levels of organization. In living things, right? Let's say in living things. Levels of organization in living things, some of them are more complex, others are very simple, like bacteria is just one cell. There are no tissues, right? In bacteria, it's just cells. There are no tissues. There are no organs. There are no systems, right? It is just the bricks. Bacteria, guys, bacteria and protists, some fungi, which are unicellular, they are very simple. It's just one single cell. But for those complex organisms like plants and animals, well, they are organized in this way. Look, first we have cells. And the cells group together to make tissues, right? And tissues group together to make organs. And then the organs group together to make organ systems. And several body systems will make an entire organism. Right? Well, epithelial cells, like these ones, you see, single epithelial cells do nothing. They are useless when they are single. However, when they group together, they make this. They make a layer. They make a tissue. And that is, like, say, let we say, what forms your skin, right? So that is called the epithelial tissue. And then, just to make another example here, epithelial cells, and then we have muscle cells. Right? Muscle cells, which look like this, you see, like this, long cells. Single muscle cells do nothing. They are useless. However, when they group together, they form a tissue that we call muscle tissue. That one is very important because that forms your muscles. Right? Muscle tissue. When we say organs, well, what organs we have in the body? Well, it depends on what system you look at. If you look at the respiratory system, what we have? Here we have, for example, the nose, the trachea, the lungs, the diaphragm, right? The ribs. All these organs work together in the respiratory system. Guys, just to mention one. If you want to mention another system here, we can say, for example, the heart, arteries, veins, capillaries, right? They all work together in the circulatory system to transport substances around the body. Right? And each of these organs have tissues of different kinds. For example, the lungs, they don't have bones, but they do have muscles, they do have skin, which is epithelial tissue. See what I mean? The ribs have muscles attached to them to make them move, and they are bones. So organs are made up of different tissues, and those tissues are made up of cells. Guys? And then we have the respiratory system, circulatory system, nervous system, reproductive system, endocrine system, right? Skeletal system. And all those systems work together, right, to form an entire organism. See? So this is how we are organized from simplest to most complex. And what we call that? We call that levels of organization. Guys? Well, if we look at what cells are made up of themselves, well, here we can maybe look at the chemical components in a cell, right? So here we can probably look at molecules like carbohydrates and proteins and lipids, right? Molecules that are found in a cell, water also, you see, molecules, and those molecules are made up of atoms. And this is the simplest one, right? Simplest one. Like, for example, two atoms of hydrogen, right? And one atom of oxygen form water. And water is found in the cells. See what I mean? But we also have what? We also have a lot of carbon atoms. Like in the carbohydrates, we have nitrogen atoms in proteins. We have phosphorus, right? And all these atoms are present in molecules like water, like carbohydrates, like proteins, right? Like DNA, for example, right? Like lipids. And all these molecules is what form cells. And then the cells group together to make tissues, and tissues group together to make organs, all these organs here. This is just two systems in the body, but if we make a list of all organs that we have in the body, it's a very long list, right? You just need to go system by system and you will have a long list. Guys? Well, are we together here? So, Kia, Aziza, Christine, Giselle, Shalom, guys.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm just checking on you, huh?
Yes, sir.
Right. So, you like it so far?
Yeah, pretty
Absolutely,
good
sir.
so
Yes.
far.
Okay. Good,
Yes,
good.
sir.
Good. Right. So, we now talk about uh, what we call cell specialization and yes, cell specialization. You see, guys, cells in our body are of different types, right? Cell specialization. Someone needs to put the mic off. Right. So cell specialization. That means that, uh, guys, that means that different type of cells play different roles in the body. Different types of cells play different roles. different roles in the body. That is what we call cell specialization. Right? As I said, we have, for example, this one, um, which is, let's say, skin cell, right? Epithelial cells. These are the ones that form the skin and lining of organs, right? Epithelial cells in the skin and lining of organs. We have muscle cells, which are kind of long like this, right? Those are muscle cells, you see, long like that, right? Muscles, of course. There are three types of muscles. We are going to study that later on, right? We have skeletal muscle, which is the one that is attached to bones. We have cardiac muscle in the heart, and we have a smooth muscle in the organs that don't have bones, like the stomach, for example, muscles in the stomach or the intestines, right? And the cells will differ somehow depending on where they are found, what type of muscle they are forming. Right? Then we have, let me say here, neurons. One neuron may look like this. This is the nucleus. And then these are kind of branches that we call dendrites. Right? These are called dendrites. It may have a long tail like this one, kind of a tail. And that kind of a tail is called the axon, right? This one here is the nucleus. And we have many millions of this, right? We have millions of those in the brain. So that is a neuron, right? A neuron, which is a nerve cell. A nerve cell. Where do we have that? In the brain and nerves around the body, right? And then we have, let's say this one you may be familiar with. It has a head with the nucleus, a neck, and a tail, right? Or this one, this is kind of the largest cell in humans, this one that I'm drawing now. Whereas this other one, the one with the tail, is the tiniest cell in humans. So, who are them? This one with a tail is the sperm, and this one is the ovum. People also call it the egg. This one is in the testicles, right? And the ovum is produced in the ovaries. They are needed for reproduction, right? And then we have bone cells. They have calcium in it, right? Calcium, salts, phosphorus, but they also have blood vessels, and a nucleus, right? So bones are living tissue in your body, you know. Bones is living material. We call them bone cells. This is just to mention some, guys. Cells that have a particular role to play in your body. They are specialized doing that, right? And that is what we call cell specialization, guys. So cell specialization means that in the body we have different type of cells that play different roles, right? Understood?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Hmm. Now there is something there is something similar, a different concept, but kind of similar, which is called cell differentiation. Cell differentiation, however, guys, is not the same thing. Huh? When you say cell differentiation, cell differentiation, that means the process by which these different type of cells are made. Right? Do you know that we have cells in the body that don't play a particular role? They can be anything. They can be transformed into any other type of cell that we may need. For example, if we need, let me say, an epithelial cell, or a fat cell, right, or a blood cell. Yeah, I didn't mention blood cells. How could I have forgotten those? We have, for example, the red blood cells, which don't have a nucleus, and then we have the white blood cells like the phagocytes, like this one, or the lymphocytes, which are round and with a big nucleus. These ones are kind of granulated, and the nucleus is irregular. And then we have the red blood cells, right? So these are blood cells. And they have their functions. White blood cells defend us against pathogens that may enter your body, like the lymphocytes will produce antibodies. And red blood cells help to transport oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the body. Right? So when you look at these cells, guys, they seem to have very little in common. And that is because each of them have a particular function in the body. However, there are other cells that we call stem cells. Stem cells. Stem cells. These are cells that don't have a particular function in your body. Well, we can say their function is to produce any of these type of cells that your body may need. Like for example, if you have a shortage of white blood cells somehow, you can get more from the stem cells, or red blood cells, or bone cells. See what I mean? Or muscle cells, or epithelial cells. We can get them from the stem cells. And that is what we call cell differentiation. So cell differentiation is the process whereby we get a certain type of cell from the stem cells. Actually, that happens. Let me tell you the in a nutshell. Uh, when that happens, actually, is when the sperm fuses with the egg during fertilization, guys. Right? Maybe you have heard about that. Hundreds of sperms will surround the egg and just one of them will penetrate it. Are you aware of that? That is called fertilization in humans. And then there will be a single cell with the genetic material of both parents here in this nucleus, and we call that a zygote. Right? Later on, that zygote will split into two as it moves through the fallopian tube towards the uterus. One nucleus here, another nucleus here, right? Like that. And then it will split each of these two cells will split into two. Then you will have 1, 2, 3, 4 cells, right? And this will split again. You will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or that bunch of cells. And eventually that will go and let's say this is the female reproductive system here, right? I'm telling you the entire story as to where cells become specialized. So until now, this process, guys, happens somewhere here, right? Somewhere here. The woman releases the egg, which is this one, the big one, right? And then that woman wanted to have a baby, and she had unprotected sexual intercourse with her husband, right? And then the sperm cells started to swim all the way looking for the egg, and then it found it here somewhere on the fallopian tube, and then the egg got fertilized and became the zygote. And the zygote started to move now. Well, actually, it doesn't move on its own. It needs to be pushed. So it is pushed through the fallopian tube, and as it is moving through the fallopian tube, it starts to divide, dividing. And then when it reaches here, guys, there will be a ball of cells, a whole bunch of cells, and all these cells are identical cells. Until now, they are all identical cells. Clones, right? Clones, copies, right? From 1 into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, 8 into 16, let we say, and then you will have this bunch of cells, and that will go and stick on the walls of the uterus, guys, and there is where cell differentiation starts, because some of these cells will become the heart, others will form the skin, others will form blood of the baby I'm talking about, right? Baby's heart, baby's skin, baby's bone, baby's brain, right? Nerve cells. So all the tissues which are needed to form that baby will come out of these cells that will continue dividing, by the way. But now they start to differentiate. They will no longer be identical. Some of them will become muscle cells in the heart. Others will become skin cells. Others will become blood cells. See what I mean, guys? So that process of cell differentiation starts there. There is where it starts. And will continue throughout your lives, right? Because the baby will continue to have skin when it is born, will continue to have bones, will continue to have blood. See what I mean? But there is when it starts. So that is what we call cell differentiation, right? Let's say here producing different types of cells, guys, out of undifferentiated undifferentiated cells, which are these ones here, right? They are all the same. Out of undifferentiated cells, called, what we call them again? Stem cells. Right? Good. So we have cell differentiation. We have cell specialization here because as they differentiate, they specialized. Some of them become blood cells, and that is their specialty, right? What comes next in the syllabus is, guys, animal cells versus plant cells. What do animal cells and plant cells have in common and what they differ in? This is what we need to look at. This topic comes in the exams. Let me just give you a preview before we move on. You see, this is a past paper question on this part of this topic. Figure 2 shows a typical plant cell. So you need to, when you look at this picture, you need to be familiar with what you are looking at, right? So you need to be able to recognize each part of a plant cell and what they do. Like here it says, name the organelles labeled A and B. So you need to know what this is, what this labeled C, and what this part here labeled D is. If I ask you right now, you will probably not know, right? For this other question here, look at this one. This is an animal cell. Diagram of the cross-section of an animal cell. There are A, B, and C, three parts labeled here, right? And they ask you which of these parts is involved in the production of proteins, or which of these parts generates energy for the cell, right? Or which of these parts encloses the contents of the cell. So guys, when you look at this diagram here, you need to be able to identify the different parts just by looking at it. When I say an animal cell, I will be referring to this one. And when I say a plant cell, it will be something like this, right? Now, I'm not using this diagram, which is already made. We are going to make our own, right? So look, ready? This is the animal cell and this is the plant cell. But this is kind of a blank drawing so far. So what do they have in common? Number one, this that we see here, guys, kind of the bordering, right? Boundary, this boundary, right? We are going to call that the cell membrane, right? That is the cell membrane. The cell membrane, right? That is kind of the boundary of the cell. It's made up of carbohydrates and proteins and fats. Here I have a picture of the, look, this is a picture of the cell membrane. So let me say this is the cell, right? Kind of like this, right? And that is the membrane. We say that is the membrane, right? So this is inside the cell, and that is the membrane. The membrane is made up of different molecules like carbohydrates, right? This one's here. Fats, you see in yellow, that is fats, right? Lipids. And the ones that you see in blue are proteins. So the cell membrane is made up of two layers of fat, fatty acids, cholesterol, you see. So the outermost part is fat and the inner part is also fatty material, right? And then we have some proteins here and there. There are some proteins on the membrane. Their function is mostly to help substances move in and out of the cell. See what I mean? There are also some carbohydrates attached somewhere, like this one here, you see? Carbohydrates. A protein with a carbohydrate is a glycoprotein, right? So, that is the cell membrane. It's very thin, right? It's not that thick. This drawing is thick, but it's actually thinner than a sheet of paper. The cell membrane, right? Very, very, very thin. However, that is the composition, right? One outer layer of fat, one inner layer of fat, right? And some proteins here and there, right? Going from one side to the other, and some carbohydrates attached. Right, so what is the function of the cell membrane, guys? The function of the cell membrane is to allow substances to move through, right? Either to go out of the cell or to come into the cell. You see, sometimes molecules need to go out or some molecules need to come into the cell. That is the function of the cell membrane, to control, right, the movement of substances in and out of the cell. Another function is that it is kind of a barrier, right, that encloses all the cell components. And cells also have that. They also have a cell membrane, right, similar to this one, right? As I said, the function of the cell membrane is to allow substances to move out of the cell. Sometimes they go through these protein channels, right? Protein channels to go out or to come into the cell. And sometimes they just diffuse themselves through the membrane, right, on their own by diffusion, right? If it is water moving out or into the cell, we'll do it by osmosis. Now, what else do they have in common? Animal cells and plant cells have a cell membrane, and what else do they have in common? They also have a nucleus. Look, let's say here this is the nucleus. Let's say this is the nucleus for the plant cell. What is inside the nucleus is DNA, chromosomes, with the genetic material. Right? Plant cells also have that. Let me not use the green color because I'm going to need it later on. So let's say these are chromosomes. These are chromosomes. The nucleus, guys, is kind of the headmaster of the cell, is the principal, the headmaster. It controls all cell activities, right? Like cell division, for example. So that is the nucleus. It controls all cell activities, right? It's kind of the director of the cell. It has DNA in it. Good. DNA. There is where the genetic material is stored. Genetic information that we inherit from our parents, right? Right. So we have that in all cells in our body. We have DNA in the nucleus, right? Right. What else? What else is in common? Well, let me tell you. Here there is kind of a jelly-like substance inside the cells, right? Kind of a jelly material. What we call that? We call that cytoplasm, right? That jelly-like material, we call it the cytoplasm. It's a fluid, it's a liquid, right? It has substances dissolved, proteins, right? Enzymes, electrolytes, right? Chemicals, ions, and again, all the other components of the cell are kind of floating on that fluid. So the function of the cytoplasm is that it encloses all cell organelles. What do we call organelles? Is all the other stuff that we have inside the cells, right? Like this one here, for example. Look, there are some that look like a hot dog. Look at this one now. A hot dog. It looks like a hot dog, doesn't it? What do we call these ones? Don't ever forget the ones that look like a hot dog. Look, on this past paper question, can you see the ones that look like a hot dog? This picture? What letter is it pointing it?
D.
D. Exactly, these ones, they look like a hot dog.
D.
Those are the ones that I'm talking about, right? And they are called mitochondria. What is A again? You can already say A. A is the nucleus, right? And here we have the cell membrane, this one here, the inner membrane. So we have the cell membrane, we have the nucleus, we have these ones that look like a hot dog. They are called mitochondria. So you see? All right. So plant cells also have that. Huh? Plant cells also have the ones that look like a hot dog, like this. What we call them again? We call them mitochondria. And there is where respiration takes place. There is where we obtain energy from food. Right? Mitochondria. Mitochondria. If we talk about one of them only, we say mitochondrion. If it is in plural, many of them we say mitochondria. Right? So there is where we obtain energy from food. It's a very important structure in cells, right? Muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria because there is where we need a lot of energy in the muscles for muscle contractions, right? Right. What else? Well, here close to the nucleus, there is a membrane, kind of this, right? A membrane, kind of folded, right? Folded up like that. You see? Around the nucleus. In a plant cell also, let's say this membrane here, that has a lot of kind of dots attached on the surface. These tiny dot-like structures, right, round like a dot, those are the ribosomes. And the membrane they are on, the membrane they are sitting on, is called the RAF endoplasmic reticulum. Right, so let me see how I can point to this again. This, I will do it on the other side. This is the RAF endoplasmic, endoplasmic, rough endoplasmic reticulum. That is a R-E-R. R-E-R. That stands for rough endoplasmic reticulum. That is that folded membrane around the nucleus, right? Close to the nucleus. And the tiny dots are called ribosomes. Ribosomes. I didn't write the RER, rough endoplasmic reticulum name in red because we are not interested on that one, right? Ribosomes. I just put it there for your own information to know that is where the ribosomes are found. Though you may also have some ribosomes, you see, kind of floating on the cytoplasm. Right? Let me just put some also floating around. Right? Some ribosomes. What is the function of the ribosomes? There is where proteins are made, right, in your body. And it's a very important cell component because there is where our proteins are synthesized or produced. You see, guys, in biology or in science, the word synthesis means building up, producing. Right? Synthesis means building up something, building something up. Right? Like from tiny molecules, putting them together to make a long molecule, like proteins. Right? And proteins are built up in the ribosomes. And the single molecules that we put together to make our proteins are called amino acids. Right? Right. So what else we have? I think these are the ones that they have in common so far. But other than that, we take a look at what they don't have in common. Why they don't have in common. This is what they do have in common, right? Now let's see the plant cells have some other structures that we don't have, right? Like for example, look, I left this space here in the middle kind of empty because all this area is taken up by this structure that is called the large vacuole. A large vacuole. And it has kind of a fluid in it, right? A fluid in it. And that fluid is called cell sap. Cell sap is water, electrolytes, sugars, right? So it takes up a lot of space in the cell, right? In a plant cell. So maybe we can say that there is where water is stored, right? Within the cell, mostly. We call it the cell sap, right, guys? Now, do we have a vacuole like plants do? Well, no, we do have vacuoles, but they are tiny. Like one here, another one there, another one there, more than one, right? So we have, let's say, small vacuoles, more than one. And actually, we don't need them for water storage. Or we are interested in the plant vacuole very much, right? It takes a lot of space in plant cells. Now, what else they differ in is that plant cells, guys, have this. Let me just draw it with a line because it's actually kind of straight. Look, this line, and then I'm gonna point it downwards. Are you seeing it? This one here. And then from here to here is kind of stiff. You see? That's why I'm using a straight line. And then this will go to the next cell here, and next one here, next one here, right? What do we call that structure? That is kind of the outer boundary of a plant cell. That is called the cell wall. Cell wall. And it's actually kind of a wall because it protects the cell. Right? If we could see under the microscope some plant cells, real life plant cells, they will look like this. Look, this would be one, this would be the next one, the next one, the next one. Like if you look at some onion skin under the microscope, guys, this is what you will see. Right? Plant cells like this. And that outer boundary, that is the cell wall. In the inner part, you will have the cell membrane like that. Right? The cell membrane. See that? And then you will have the vacuole full of water. You see, a large vacuole. Right? However, if it was animal cells that you see under the microscope, well, you will see them like this, kind of round, right? Right, with the nucleus. But guys, well, uh, what else do they differ in? Is that plants have these structures in green here. Look, this one in green, this one, this other one here, this other one here, this one. What do we call these structures which are actually green in color, by the way, because they have a pigment in them that is called the chlorophyll. What do we call those? Well, these are the,
The ribosomes.
uh, no, sorry, uh, actually the ribosomes in a plant, thank you for mentioning it, are these dots, just like in an animal cell, right? These dots are the ribosomes in a plant. They also have ribosomes, which are these ones here. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't say that plants also have ribosomes. The ribosomes in plant cells are found on the rough endoplasmic reticulum also, which is this membrane here, right? So let me put that also. Rough endoplasmic reticulum with ribosomes. Because plant cells also need to produce proteins on the ribosome, just like we do. But I was talking about these green structures here. These green structures, you know what those are? Those are the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts, guys. Don't forget that name, huh? Let me put it here. Chloroplasts. CH right? Chloroplasts. Why are they green? Because they contain a chemical, a green pigment called chlorophyll. Right? So chloroplasts, maybe we can indicate here with chlorophyll, Phyll, chlorophyll. Right? CHLOROPHYLL, chlorophyll. These are very, very important structures in plant cells. You know why, guys? Because there is where they do photosynthesis. You see, plant cells do photosynthesis on the chloroplast. They use the chlorophyll to catch sunlight energy, and then they put together carbon dioxide that they take from the air and water that they take from underground, and that will produce glucose, which is the form of food that plants produce in the first place. Okay, guys? So just look at these diagrams here. You need to know all these names and what they do, right? So the question that I mentioned before, maybe now you can answer some of these questions, guys. So look, name the organelles labeled A and B. So A, as we said, is the nucleus, right? All this here is the nucleus. Nucleus. And B is what? Look at B. Tiny dots. What do we call the tiny dots? And you see this is kind of a membrane with a lot of tiny dots. Dots. One dot, another one, another one, another one, another. Tiny dots. We call them again? Well, those are the ribosomes. Yeah, those are the ribosomes. And there is where proteins are made. Now, state one function of each of the organelles C and D. Well, here this is C. It's not green in color because this is a black and white picture. But this was supposed to be in green. What are those? They don't say to name it. They just say to mention a function. But to mention a function, you need to know what it is. And those are the chloroplasts. So the function here is this is the site for photosynthesis. Right? There is where plants do photosynthesis. And this one that looks like a hot dog. I will say this again. This is the chloroplast. And the one that looks like a hot dog is called the mitochondria. Remember? Mitochondria. If it's one, we say mitochondrion. What is the function of the mitochondria? This is the site for respiration, meaning that there is where respiration takes place, right? For respiration. You can also say the function of the mitochondria is to obtain energy from food, and the function of the chloroplast is to produce food through photosynthesis. So if you answer this and this and this and this, you have 4 marks, right? So this is how this may come in the exams. The next one would be this one. Look. Match the labeled structures above with their functions below by placing the correct letter A, B, or C on the line here. So we have A, That's the hot dog again. What's that again? Look, that looks like a hot dog. This one too, you see? So that is the mitochondria. Mitochondria. So what happens in the mitochondria? Didn't we say that there is where we get energy from food? Through respiration. So here it is, look. Generates energy for the cell. So that will be, what letter is that again? A. Right? So this one is for this. Right? Generates energy for the cell, and the process is called respiration. Right? Respiration. And B. Let's see which of these encloses the contents of the cell. Well, yes, because that is the membrane, isn't it? So that will be B. This one here encloses the contents of the cell. And it is involved in protein synthesis is the tiny dots, ribosomes. Look, this one here and this one here. Or this one, or this one, or this one, any of these dots that you see floating about, those are ribosomes, right? And what they do is they produce proteins. So that will be C. Guys, what do we call each of these structures within the cell? We call them cell organelles, right? So all of these are cell organelles. Guys, cell organelles. The cell components are called cell organelles, and each of them has a name and a function, right? That you need to be familiar with. And one more thing, this topic, this particular part, is always in the exams, always. So I advise you to go through this picture here, right? And try to match the structure with the name and the name with the function, right? Now, as a summary, there are three things, let's say, that plant cells have that animal cells don't. Like what? Can you tell me, guys? What are three cell organelles or structures present in a plant cell which are absent in an animal cell?
Chloroplast.
Yes, boy, the chloroplast, we don't have that.
Cell sap.
Cell sap.
Yes, the cell sap within the
Cell.
and the cell
And the
wall
large vacuole.
and the large vacuole. Good. You know what? I forgot one. Let me tell you the next one. The next one is that plant cells are capable of storing food. You see, it's part of the food that plants produce. They store it within the cell, but you know what? They store it like a starch molecules. So let me draw here down here some look some starch storage. Let's say if it is a rainy day or a rainy bunch of days, like in a week, sometimes we have in Trinidad, you see, 3-4 days in a row, raining and cloudy, plants cannot do photosynthesis. If there is no sunlight, they cannot do photosynthesis. However, they can rely on the starch that they store in their cells. We also store food, but we don't store starch. You know what we store? We store a next carbohydrate very similar to starch, but we call it glycogen. Glycogen. So here we have glycogen storage. That is carbohydrate that will give you energy, right? But in a form of glycogen. You know, we store a lot of glycogen in the liver, for example. Every time you eat, you store some glucose in your liver in a form of glycogen so that you can eat it for the periods, to get energy when you are not. You can use it to get energy when you are not eating. Like, for example, you have a meal at night. Tonight, when we finish here, you will eat something, right? Now, when you eat, you will store some glucose in your liver as glycogen. And then you will be using that storage throughout the night because you spent about 8 hours sleeping without eating. Even in the morning, some people go and start doing stuff without eating anything, and they will still get energy from that storage. Well, plants do the same, but they don't store glucose as glycogen. They store glucose as starch. As a summary, plant cells have a cell wall, have a large vacuole, have chloroplast, and store starch. Animal cells don't have a cell wall, don't have chloroplast. Vacuoles are more than one and small, right? And we store food in a form of glycogen.